This presentation is part of a workshop voicing indigenous food sovereignty struggles, which has been organized by the project Indigenous Food Systems in Transition, financed by Future Food at the Swedish University for Agricultural Sciences. Furthermore, the workshop was organized in collaboration with Case Study 18 of the Horizon 2020 Finance project Just North. You are welcome to listen to the lecture.
I want to welcome Birgitta Åhman, professor in reindeer husbandry at the Swedish University of Agricultural Science, and you will share a presentation on the impact of pasture resources on reindeer meat production. So I am what I eat. Does that go for reindeer too?
Yes, it does. Yes. Thank you, Lena Maria, and thanks organizers for inviting me to this workshop. My background is that I'm a biologist, and I've been working with reindeer and reindeer management issues research since the mid-80s. But what I will talk about now is maybe not really news, but serve as a background to the talks about the loss and disturbance on land, which you will hear later from Per Sandström and Anna Skarin, and it also relates to some of the topics we talked to previously in the seminar. So reindeer, like all animals, evidently need enough food in order to grow and reproduce. But unlike farm animals, reindeer usually depend on natural pastures all year around, and the access to natural pasture limits how many reindeer you can have on the land. Reindeer also need this suitable pasture all times of the year, and what's suitable differs depending on weather and so on. And they are also dependent on being able to move between different, I don't know how to move this. So they also need possibility to move between different land and different vegetation types depending on season and weather, for example, snow conditions. Reindeer also need what herders call grazing peace, betesro in Swedish, and different kinds of disturbances will obstruct grazing and may force reindeer to leave the best pastures. Grazing conditions affect production through various pathways, which I will try to briefly specify. I will also mention some other factors that have large implications on the productivity within reindeer husbandry. So first, it's about calf production. So of course, the production of whatever products you have in reindeer husbandry, meat, for example, but also hides and antlers and whatever, depends on how many calves are born each year. And that depends on the number of females in prime age in the herd. And it also depends on female body condition, which in turn depends on the access to good land. Early calf survival is dependent on the birth weight of the calf, which in turn depends on female body condition. And also the female's milk production is dependent on that she has actually fat reserves in her body when the calf is born. Then external factors that may cause mortality is very bad weather at calving. For example, if it's cold, cool and windy and raining and it's wet on the ground and then it gets cold again, that could be very difficult for the calf. And also there are the predators, which I will come back to in the end of this talk. It has been shown rather clearly that female body mass, also weight in autumn, has large effects on whether or not she will have a calf the next summer. And age is also important. So the younger females have less chance to get pregnant and also to produce a calf in good enough condition to survive the first weeks. And then when the female gets older and heavier, there's a better chance for her to produce a calf. So from 5 years of age, she's at her prime age and will maybe be so until she's 10 or 12 years old, when there is less chance for her to have a calf. Female body condition also affects the weight of the calf. We had an experiment where we weighed the females in early April and the calves were weighed in early June. There is some effect of calving dates, so that of course calves that are born earlier, they will weigh more in June, but the female body mass doesn't affect that much. So both the number of calves and the weight of the calves is dependent on female body mass. Then the calf, of course, has to survive in order to give any production. But from calf marking, which is in Sweden is usually beginning of July, it's mostly predation and partly some accidents that cause mortality. But then the growth of the calf and also as the regain of body reserves in adults is dependent on access to good quality pasture and also relief from disturbances. And that could be natural disturbances like insect harassment when it's very warm, or it could be human disturbances. Then in Sweden, like in most parts of Norway and Finland, the main slaughter is calves of the year. So many calves, and especially male calves, are slaughtered in the autumn. But you, of course, need adult animals to produce more calves, and you need to keep some calves to replace those that get old. And then it's important that these animals survive, and their survival depend on what body condition they have when the winter starts, which in turn depends on summer pasture, and then of course access to suitable winter pasture, and it depends very much on weather conditions. I think you all know that poor winter weather and icing on the ground can cause starvation in reindeer and eventually mortality. You can supplementary feed reindeer in case of bad snow condition or limited access to pasture. But then there is also predation and maybe some accidents. It could be car accidents or run over by a train or whatever. It could also be that reindeer fall down cliffs or things like that. There could also be diseases although most reindeer on natural pasture are healthy. But lack of pasture in summer will result in reindeer not gaining enough body reserves. Females may not get pregnant if they are in poor condition in the autumn, and it's risk for high mortality the next winter. If there is lack of pasture in the winter, it will result in malnutrition. Body reserves will not be sufficient to survive. Females that are pregnant may lose the calf or not have enough energy to produce milk for the calf when it's born. And animals may starve to death. But then there is feeding and actually development of special commercial feeds for reindeer started in the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, and Finland in the 60s, and it was further developed during the 70s. So there is food that you can buy for reindeer. These are grain-based feeds using the same ingredients that you use for concentrates for cows or sheep or whatever. You also feed reindeer hay or silage, but this is often too much fiber to serve as the only feed for reindeer. Reindeer are not adapted to this. So there are positive and negative effects of being dependent on natural ranges. Of course, there is limited access to forage, but it could still be enough. Reindeer need to active search for food. Reindeer can eat lichens that they are adapted to and which are good for them and providing good energy. There is low animal density, which is good because diseases doesn't spread as much.
You have 2 minutes left.
Okay, and if you have to feed the reindeer, of course there's plenty of food, but there are also health risks with the high animal density, and it affects. If you feed before slaughter, it affects the meat in relation to what Lena Maria talked to. We don't know about if it affects vitamin D or trace minerals, but it affects the taste and it affects the fat composition. Yeah. So it creates problems. So undisturbed and large enough grazing grounds with enough access to plants of high nutritive value is a prerequisite for survival, large growth, and high reproduction. I will just end with showing a picture of a factor that affects production very much, and it's the large predators which are present within the reindeer herding area, which is the northern half of Sweden and also Norway and northern Finland. So there are a lot of predators that take away much of the production. I would say that maybe production could be at least 30% higher if it wasn't as much predators. So thank you.